Hello, everybody. Welcome to this panel session discussion around porous and innovation and how that applies to UK spine. I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming our panelists who are all directly involved or have been involved in one way or another with UK spine directly. So I'm looking forward to a really interesting, exciting and invigorating session that I hope you'll, as delegates, all participate with me in asking good questions of our panelists. What we want to do is start with introductions, brief introductions, and then we'll go straight into the questions. So Frederic, will you please start by introducing yourself, please, and welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here and contribute to this panel. So my name is Frederic Bone, and I'm a research fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. And I'm a social scientist looking at how innovation works in general, and in particular, I'm interested in biomedical innovation. So I'm interested about how do we go from discovery and science into innovation, change in practice, and new products. And I've been working within the UK spine in trying to understand the overall network and try to do an evaluation of what impact the UK spine has had. So I've interviewed a few people across different projects, and I have a bit higher overview of what the UK spine has been doing.
Thank you, Freddie. And you'll, of course, once we've done the introduction, start us off with the first question. Okay. Hi, how are you doing?
Me, Malcolm.
Yeah, introduce yourself, please, Malcolm.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. Yeah, so Malcolm Skingle, I born man at Glaxo, first 20 odd years a neuroscientist. For the last 25 years, I've been working at the interface between funders, universities, and my own scientists, and indeed other companies. So I'm really into porous ways of working and collaborating. I've known Martino, who's of similar ilk, for many a year, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Malcolm. And John, a very warm welcome to you.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here. John Overington, CIO at the Medicines Discovery Catapult. Really interested in trying to understand why drug discovery is so hard. Things around, say, target selection, attrition, failure, and in particular, I guess in the context of the spine project, the use of data, the generation of data to do with product profiles, assays, and as you'll hear a little bit later, some drug repositioning work.
Thank you, John. So our first question relates to what the porous pipeline means to you and why it's important to your operations, giving hopefully one specific example. Freddie, could you start us off, please?
Thanks. So I'll give it more of a broad overview because I guess a practical example are more with John and Malcolm. So for me, the porous pipeline is really networked infrastructure of partners with complementary expertise. So within the UK spine, there have been core members from the Crick Institute to the University of Oxford to the Medicine Discovery Catapult, and they have come together with different expertise to form that network infrastructure, all those different organizations to come together to develop drugs. Obviously, this is different from traditional drug pipeline because people doing drug discovery and drug development are usually working in their silo and their own expertise. So you get a lot of loss of innovation and products as you go through the pipeline. And the idea of collaboration and building that network helps really to move targets smoothly through the development. So in terms of the porous side as well, what the UK spine has tried to introduce is the idea that people could join in a different part of the pipeline. So you have that infrastructure and network of organization, and people could, in an open way, join in and and produce targets and collaborate with other people within the network to develop their targets. So it's really that open part for people to join and develop their own targets.
Thank you, Freddie. And Malcolm, over to you with a specific example, please.
So we got about 100,000 people in GSK. We've got several thousand scientists, all of them at PhD or above level. many of them world leading in their respective fields. But we have to work with people outside of the company if we're going to innovate and develop technologies which are going to underpin our industry. Drug discovery is very difficult. Companies have to constantly innovate or they'll absolutely wither on the vine. So porous interventions are everything to organisations like GSK. The example that I might use to start off is the Structural Genomics Consortium, which is well known to many people on this in this grouping. Last month, we had the 17-year anniversary of the SGC. What many people forget, history's forgotten, it was actually Glaxo who had the idea for the SGC, because we realised that on our own, we couldn't possibly do enough protein crystal structures to actually service our industry. And so we had 11 companies, I think, negotiating around the table at the Wellcome Trust who were going to be honest brokers. And it was a little bit too early for them then. They didn't quite get it. They get it now. And one by one, they fell out of those negotiations, including IBM and 10 other farmers. And we were left holding the baby with the Wellcome Trust. The Wellcome Trust very kindly stumped up the lion's share of the money. We put in 3 million, they put in 18. The Wallenberg came in. Once we got it going, we got it established. 4 years on, then 4 more companies wanted to join. 4 years after that, another 4. And so it grew. People got it. It was a little bit too early. So we've always been about open innovation and porous science. Often all we require on things is freedom to operate. We don't have to own everything. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and you've thank you for raising open innovation, Mal. Yeah, well, what are your thoughts on where we are with open innovation? Is it identical to porous intervention, or is it slightly different?
I think we've got new issues now. Technology has moved on so quickly. I'm a great believer in the more you put out yourself, the more trust you develop, the more you get back. So you obviously have to know what is proprietary to you and what is your competitive advantage. But 95% of what we do, frankly, we can put out there for everybody to benefit from, because often we want other people to kick the tires of our science. So, there's been a lot over the last, over this meeting, actually, talking about biomarkers. And obviously the thing with biomarkers, you want the biomarkers out there because you want other people to test them and to add to the data. The thing is, we're now getting so good at effectively mining data with data analytics, AI, machine learning. The game's different now. Now it's about which data sets are proprietary, which ones are not, which data can we mash with other data to where we need to be. And the rules are changing very, very quickly. I mean, just going back to the SGC for a moment, I mean, they published more than 2,000 protein structures. They provided more than 25,000 probes globally around the world to push that science forward. But that was at a pre-competitive level. Obviously, the closer it gets to man, the more difficult it is. And then it starts getting really expensive.
Brilliant.
Be a little bit more careful with the IP.
Thank you so much, Mal. John, I mean, you're living and breathing it through the MDC as a key partner in the whole porous. And so I'm interested to see which example you might choose.
Well, thank you. So we're about 2 orders of magnitude smaller than GSK, of course. And one of the things we need to do there is I guess, know our strengths and know the points that we can intervene in the drug discovery process. So you will have heard from Graham earlier about some of the work to do with the target selection and validation and early hit discovery. But also one of the other areas that we've sort of contributed to is through some data gathering and some data analytics around repurposing. So reuse of existing pharmaceuticals, potentially leading to the clinical validation of particular pathways for novel targets to pick up and use. So we've put together this website, DREAM.ai, DNR-EAM.ai, and this brings together data on all approved drugs and allows selection of drugs that have got good properties for repositioning. They play well with other drugs. They often in an elderly population, the patients will be not heavily medicated, but have polypharmacy. There's specific issues with drugs in elderly people, such as hepatic blood-brain barrier and renal insufficiency. So we developed a tool to take all the 1,500 approved drugs and select it, boil it down to about 300, play well with other drugs for repositioning. And we took that core set and said, what could we do with mining or using that data to do something with, I guess, healthy aging? We've probably heard a lot already about the role of infectious disease in aging. It's often MRSA or viral infections that actually are the sort of executors in a sort of life process. So one of the things we looked at was, could we find drugs from this set of privileged drugs that prevented viral infections? So with some researchers at UCL, using this spine-developed tool, we looked at primary healthcare records and identified, on the basis of hypotheses generated from literature mining and so forth, 3 specific testable hypotheses to do with reduction in viral infections, hopefully in an elderly population. So 3 of those, I can tell you now. Metformin, widely used anti-diabetic drug, is protective for viral infections quite broadly, quite a potent effect on reduction of flu. Proton pump inhibitors have a similar, quite profound effect on viral infections. And then finally, the bisphosphonates. Again, they seem to have quite a potent antiviral effect and a general impact on healthy aging. So an example of a sort of late stage intervention there. And one of the nice things was the ability to use the spine funding to select a point of intervention that was both opportunistic in the context of COVID infections, the availability of primary healthcare data, and then data mining on top of that.
Brilliant, thank you, John, and that's a great lead into the next question, which you're going to lead on. But before I do that, I just wanted to point the delegates to the excellent presentations that were given previously by Mike Ferguson, Mike, and also Graham Wilkinson. They were a really good precursor and setup to what we are talking about now, about how this poor intervention may or may not work well. So, John, it's back to you with the what works well, what works not so well, what are the key learning points? And, just to put you in a direction, we talk about people, infrastructure and money, but there are some key learning points about critical mass, about specialization and selecting the different points of intervention. What are your views on that?
I think, for me, some of it is the sort of social dynamics side of things. It's a vision and a shared purpose. It's a clear articulation of that. It's a band of the willing, but also it's quite critically knowing as an organization or as a group or a scientist where your strengths are and what position you play in the team. And then when the ball is, knowing when to pass the ball, I think is a key skill and a key part of a successful network coming together. Some of the things that don't work in the past, I've certainly, often people overestimate the ease of drug discovery. They make an invention at one point or an insight at one point and then stay stuck in thinking that the rest of the community that have gone before them in some way just don't really understand the issue. So I think it's this passing the ball is a key thing of what makes something successful. And a part of that is being part of a team, and the team needs to be right-sized for the task in hand.
It's passing the ball with an appetite to engage on each side of the ball passing, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
Mal, Graham was asked what would make this work better in his presentation, and he said someone with deep pockets. So over to you with what works well and what works not so well.
Well, I'd absolutely endorse what John just says. I mean, the academics that are successful in any part of this drug discovery process are those that realise that they haven't got all the bits of the jigsaw themselves and also know when to take help. And there's always a balance between keep as much to yourself as possible to drive it as quickly as you can before engaging with a big pharma. I always advise people when they have things, platforms or indeed molecules, to actually get a couple of big pharma interested, to get them competing. I think you have to have the right people engaged in the projects at the right time, for sure. Even in our own organisation, the development mentality is very different from the early research mentality. And you need to know when to let go. Having said that, you know, I was fortunate enough to be in a pharmacology department which had 6 drugs that made it all the way to market, probably the most successful pharmacology department ever. And with all of those, there was one champion. Although you bring in the different skills and it's very much a team, you have one champion who's puts himself out there to absolutely drive that molecule through to conclusion. Because often they start off with one indication and end up in another indication, which is you know, serendipity with repurposing.
It's that leadership and guidance that's required. I wanted to ask you, Mal, and Freddie might have some comments on this as well. When we first started talking about open innovation, porous intervention, there was a lot of hullabaloo around technology transfer offices, and the first question would be, what about the IP? And a lot early on with the Lambert templates. Do you think that scenario's calmed down a bit now?
I think it has calmed down. You know, I personally have probably signed 600 or 700 Lamberts, you know, over the years. I think getting the message over that often all we need is freedom to operate. And the whole ethos of the Lambert agreements is that no one's stopped from doing future research. If it's contract research, then you expect to pay a premium, you expect to keep it secret, you won't publish it. Actually, you know, publication, our scientists want to publish just as much as the academic. And our field-weighted citation impact is often higher than the academics because we only publish when we've got something to say rather than being forced to publish. So yeah, I think it has eased up. I think we're about to get into a new wave of debate because whenever there's uncertainty, there's always debate. I mean, obviously we've got open targets, we've got UK Biobank, we've got massive data sets now that everybody's mining, but there are also proprietary data sets, and we have to be very careful what data we mesh with other data, particularly when using artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that issue is only going to get more complex. Yeah.
So, Freddie, we're on learning points, but I wanted to ask you, do you think academics understand the difference between open science and open innovation as others speak about it? Do you think it's a hindrance in that understanding?
I don't know if they would think about it or openly or not, because I think academics work a lot with their own field of expertise and have a very good idea of what their contribution to knowledge would be and what would be a breakthrough understanding or discovery. But I think there might be different levels of academics understanding the pipeline of drug development. So they know very well about the science and they know well about how to do their science, but not many of them, or there is a certain number of people who don't know about what it takes to take it through the pipeline and might not have the network of colleagues in industry that might be startup or large company, or other colleagues such as Medicine Discovery Catapult. So they need help to get this forward, and to not think that once they found something, it would automatically be picked up by somebody else. And in terms of what the UK SPI maybe has tried to do in terms of the collaboration, I think one important point is to keep in mind that different organizations such as academia, industry, and the Catapult have very different ways of operating. They have different ways they're funded, and they have different objectives in mind. And sometimes it can be quite difficult for everybody on a team, even if they have a shared goal, to come together as they have another main job, which is publishing or contributing to their own institution and community. And that can be a barrier which a network can help to make that easier, make that process easier, if that makes sense.
Understood. And any other learning points from your perspective?
Maybe on the network side, and going back about who has a network in terms of industry network. There is different levels between earlier career researcher and people who have been in the game longer. And it's important to have that network and help people earlier on in their career to have that broader understanding of what the pipeline is, and that broader picture, because when you're doing research and you do a PhD, you push to have that very deep and precise knowledge about what you're researching, but without that understanding of the translation pipeline, it is quite difficult to situate how your work can be useful for others and to make those translational steps easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, John, I can see you nodding there. Was there something you wanted to add? Maybe Freddie?
Yeah, just really to pick up on one of the final points there. I think, you know, our sort of education system is quite broad in the UK. Then we narrowed down for a PhD, and the successful researchers are the ones that understand their work in a broader context, rather than just keep ploughing on in a very narrow setting. So I guess we'll return to it a little bit later with, you know, the profile of the people. But for me, you know, there's different just personalities that fit into the scientific framework of drug discovery.
Yeah, just be careful on your sound, John.
Sorry.
You're in and out of sound a little bit. Can I just push you, because you're at the coalface, so you see a whole diverse, dynamic range of academics, and presumably the general trend is for appetite to engage, right?
Absolutely. I think it will be interesting to see what the impact on funding is at the moment. A lot of the academic community is certainly nervous of funding, and I do think they see industry as a big pot of gold in the future. So I think it'll just be interesting to see what happens with you know, as the funding announcements come out, some of the implications and so forth.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. So I think we're on, having done the overview, appreciation of what porous intervention means to us, given examples, and then talked about learning points. I think we should move on to some guidance and steer for UK Spine moving forwards, bearing in mind that overview. I should point out to the delegates that we're happy to receive any questions that you might have in the chat. Please feel free to add in. We've got the questions, but I'm always happy to tap in and feed into anything you want to ask us. So I think on that point, learning points around the pipeline, around moving forwards in terms of the funding phase that UK Spine today. Malcolm, what would tip, advice, guidance for UK Spine moving forward?
I think that as things move through the pipeline and get more advanced, to make sure that the right skills are engaged. I mean, the people in UK Spine, many of them are ex-pharma, so they know how things used to be in pharma at least. They'll have a good idea of what's required. They will also know that things start to get very expensive very quickly. So as much as the in silico work and the information gathering that we can pull together, you know, the database that John spoke of, you know, absolutely brilliant. I also think, I'm not just playing to the panel here, but for a decade or more, I've absolutely realised the importance of having social scientists in your team. It used to be clinicians, so that when we made drugs and threw them over the wall into the clinic, there weren't any surprises. But now I think it's social scientists, because so many things now of the technologies need buy-in from the public and the Daily Mail. And if we don't have social scientists asking the nitty-gritty questions and getting the warts and all answers, we're not going to take people with us. So things like genetic manipulation, cell and gene therapy, things like access to electronic health records, you know, mashing genetic and phenotype data, fitness data, data on your club card, how much wine you're drinking, cigarettes, etc. You can get a very good profile of someone's degree of wellness before you get their illness, and that's coming quicker than people think. And if we don't have the public with us, then, you know, somebody will put the foot in the door.
Yeah, I guess we probably need to articulate better as a community to the layperson the value. We've never had a better time to do that in the context of what the layperson understands about the value of science.
Yeah.
Freddie, over to you.
Well, I think that gives me a perfect segue to what I wanted to say in terms of the porous pipeline within the UK Spine, because you showed really that you can push through targets through that porous pipeline that you put in place. But I wanted to ask a broader question to the network: is what happens when the number of targets grows? Obviously, there is not unlimited resources, and we need to put targets. So I'm going to ask a typical social science question about who decides what gets pushed forward or what will go through the pipeline and what the resources are going to put on and what actually stays behind, because there is many trade-offs between what is commercially viable quicker, what is a big gap in therapeutics, what do the patient need in terms of the delivery. We talk a lot about drugs, but they might not want any more drugs to take. Or it might be something else. Patient might have a completely different idea about what might be important or life-changing for them. So the question about who decides the kind of target who goes through the UK spine might be an important question to ask when you scale up the pipeline if you get very successful.
And that will be linked to the funding streams as well, of course, won't it?
Yes.
John, what view from the coalface?
Yeah, I think it's quite a complex area. One of the things Graham and I were discussing the other day was you heard some of the success on the target screening and so forth. But what's the trajectory of those to the clinic, and what partners would be involved in that? What are the models that exist to measure, or the predictive biomarkers that would measure aging or approximate intervention in an aging process? So one of the things we're doing is thinking of assembling a sort of graph of assays, all the precedents that exists for aging and aging research, trying to formalize these into various mechanisms, and then for each of the specific targets, try and track the sort of network of experiments that would be done towards a clinical trial. And this is something I think that in pharma, they're great at. They've got development experience before. They know what a compound needs to look like. I think in academia in general, to sort of overgeneralize, there's a little bit of naivety about this jump between a target and a genetic association and a drug that's going to do something in a person. There's hundreds of people and thousands of decisions between those 2 points. I think as a general comment on openness, also with openness comes competition. I think you can overmanage a process, and having multiple groups working openly on the same target or data or process is exactly the thing to encourage. At the end of the day, it's people putting money on the table, believing in an idea well enough to spend their own money as opposed to someone else's money on a project. That's really a marker of success. I know it's a hell of a lot easier to spend other people's money than it is my own on something. And yeah.
There's something about good, strong project management in the process as well, which I think could be. I've got a couple of questions from the audience. I think it's a good time to try and address them now. There's an academic perspective and then an industrial perspective. So if I may, I'll start with Freddie on the academic perspective and ask you for opinions as well. So the question is, academics can be constrained by institutional rules and charges imposed when they try to collaborate with industrial partners. What can we do to change historic academic attitudes to ensure that industrial partnerships are seen to provide value to all partners? Again, the coalface, you're doing it, so presumably you have a mechanism for making that less of an issue, John.
To John.
The question was to me. I thought it was to Frederic.
Well, let's start with Freddie. Go on.
Okay, I can start. I think that there is a lot of noises in the right direction from different institutions. So funders are very keen for that knowledge exchange, and obviously there is many actors who are also very keen for that knowledge exchange. But obviously the academic system is a very constrained system with which is poorly resourced and also probably quite hierarchical. So there is structures and culture in academia, which actually, you might have a pecking order of what you might think is better research than other. And from what I've heard, usually more fundamental research is seen as better research than more applied and translational research. So this is my experience from talking to people or doing interview with different, with people looking at the translational aspect. And usually also the funding system is built towards the kind of fellowship, kind of tenure track way. So you have that pathway or that career prospect that is within the system imposed to people. So while people might be willing and really wanting to actually make a difference and collaborate, I think there is structure which is really ingrained, which makes it probably more difficult for people who are trying to do it.
I agree. There's something about culture change there as well. John.
Yeah, I think actually to sort of challenge that a little bit, we're on a sort of precipice of change. I think, funding mandates to do with publications and open data are clearly leveling the field a little bit. There seems to be a strong direction from funders to do that. Funding changes in publishing models, but also the fact that you've just got to be a lot better at handling data to make innovation. And some of the successful groups that I see, with the strong figurehead leaders, are the ones that are really getting in great data scientists and people who know how to handle data into the right places. I think automation and the cost of technology in particular is going to transform things as well. The barrier to entry is going to be a lot lower to everyone. The process is going to become more democratic.
Thank you, John. Malcolm, if you don't mind, can I ask you a different question?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So this question is for Malcolm. Does industry see any value in counterbalancing the one champion model of progressing specific initiatives to a less biased process?
So if I understand, so with respect to interaction and collaboration, don't put all your eggs in one basket, spread it across several groups. Is that what you read into that question?
Yeah, it's about partnership and not having to take the lead all the time, I think.
Yeah, I think all you can do in these cases, I think other companies have caught GSK up now. I thought that we were head and shoulders above most companies when it came to collaborating with academic partners. I think you always have to be fair and reasonable so that people want to come back to you. I think if you highlight the case studies that you've got of things that have gone really well and the things that you've started and driven that bit of the science space, then people are more likely to believe that you're going to do it again. And actually, academics should always do their homework. They should always know the literature in the space to know what the competition is. And it should also play it back the other way. There's nothing wrong with a bit of competition. I like healthy competition. I think on the early stage stuff, I think, it's fair enough, because often we will have collaborations with several university groups where there'll be technologies which are actually competing, because frankly, we don't know which one's going to come to the fore, and we can't be left with our trousers around our ankles at the start line if one of them breaks and we're not in it. So we would wait to see which one develops, and then we would go with that one. We'd then invest and pull it in-house. So the development end of things, actually, why would you go to a university? Why would you not go to a CRO who deliver on budget and on time?
Yeah. Thank you, Miles. And before I come to Freddie, there's something around the Apollo Therapeutics model, where that's early stage, 3 pharma looking into universities together and then deciding which projects they want to take the lead or which ones they want to collaborate on.
Yeah.
Anything from the industry perspective?
On Apollo?
Freddie, no, let's move on.
Sorry, I didn't quite get what you're asking.
I was asking if you had a view on the industry perspective on this champion or partnering.
No, I don't know, actually.
Okay,
sorry.
That's all right. And while we've got the questions up, there's a technical question for you, John. Do metformin and other drugs reduce infection by direct mechanisms or by more indirect ones by making people healthier in general?
Yep.
Metabolic disease, leaner, healthier, less prone to infection?
That's a really great question, and I guess it's one of establishing causation from the correlations or the patterns in data you see. An interesting thing with metformin is that it was first developed and approved as an antiviral. It came from an anti-infective approach or a long series of research. And then once it had gone into patients in an anti-infective influenza setting, actually, the effects on blood sugar were seen, and these clearly taken up as a long-term chronic medication. So it's maybe squaring the circle on that particular story around metformin. Looking at the data, though, there is a lot of confounding with, we see similar protective mechanisms for a lot of for a number of other anti-diabetic medications, but the clinical use of those is often following metformin use. So it's very, very difficult to tease apart this complex data. Proton pump inhibitors, I think there's pretty good evidence that actually it's a direct antiviral mechanism. We're confirming that in some partnered studies at the moment, and similarly for the bisphosphonates, although they're given to generally iller people, there are some very good hypotheses for direct antiviral action through the sort of FPPA's target of the nitrogen bisphosphonates.
Thank you, John.
What about off-target effects, though? For each of those, I mean, you have to look with the same rigor at other things that might go potentially wrong by changing.
Excellent question. So we believe the PPIs are through a non-antacid target, so not to do with the primary mechanism of action. We've got some tantalizing data on the basis of some genetics that is the case, but we just wish we had a larger amount of genotyped patients. For the bisphosphonates, we believe it's an on-target effect, but because it's quite deep in a sort of biological pathway, it's quite pleiotropic in terms of how it impacts the body.
Right. Okay. Thank you, guys. That was a good example of porous intervention into the panel discussion. So we've got a good overview. We've given examples. We talked about what works and what doesn't. We've talked about advice, guidance, and tips for UK spine. Let's look to the future now. And Freddie, start us off around future skills requirement, future skills needs, please.
So I think there's two main types of profile that would be very useful for the UK spine. Obviously, there is technical skills, which would be hugely influential, and I think Malcolm and John would be much better to talk about this. So I would raise a focus about the skills of the people that I would call the connector, because we talked since the beginning that the drug pipeline is a very complex pipeline, and I think the UK spine has done a good job at developing skills in people who understand the science and are networked across a wide variety of people and understand what these people want to do, what their mission are, and what they're interested in, and they're able to make connection between potential partners as ideas arise, because academics might not, be able to maintain such a wide and deep network. So I think there is, in terms of connectors, there is two levels of connection: the more academic and science side, and also the commercialization side. How would an academic go about if they were to commercialize or partner with commercial partners, both startup companies and large companies, because they're quite different? So this kind of skills, that kind of complementary skills to the scientific skills, because obviously we need to rely on good science to have good products. But those types of profile, I think, are hugely important to make the kind of porous pipeline frictionless or much easier to develop targets.
Thank you, Freddie. So Malcolm, your views on future skills?
So I was actually talking at a skills thing this morning. It was the launch of the Science History Partnership in the West Midlands, where they've got a lot of convergence for devices and engineering. So they're pulling together healthcare, diagnostics, AI, machine learning, plus their engineering. I think that's the way. I think that rate of pace of change is so fast that everybody will need data analytics. All key researchers in 5 years' time will need the skills to analyse ever-increasing data sets, and also pulling different data sets together. So on the technical side, I think artificial intelligence and machine learning will be one of the core sets, like public speaking and report writing. I also think that you need people in organisations with a strong mix of behavioural and technical skills. So companies are always after self-starters who can show their initiative and work on their own, but they also need to be part of team science and be good team workers. Some people don't have any line responsibility whatsoever, but they have to be particularly good at driving the technology and communication through a matrix. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big ask, but I think they're the skills that we will need to develop for really successful companies in the future.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I agree with everything the other panel members have said. I think the future is more multidisciplinary, more transient. I think people can't think of a career for 30 years now doing the same thing. There's movement, change all the time. The data skills I think are really important. I think the other really important skill or attribute going forward is your network. And I think we're seeing a profound change in building professional networks. They're more open, they're more online, they're more democratic. It's not an old boys network, college high table or something to sort of picture an old fashioned view of how the world works. I'm really thankful that social media in particular is democratizing access to people and discussion and building productive networks.
And John, from your experience, because we should broach it, in terms of diversity, do you see enough diversity in the people involved in your project?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. I think diversity of opinions, diversity of views on things are just as important as other things that we think about for diversity. I think groupthink is a bad thing. You need people who sort of rail against convention and are prepared to challenge and speak to power and not be punished for that or sidelined. And I think the other thing which, again, picking up on something that Malcolm said, is around this sort of concept of what we see by leadership. What is leadership going forward?
Yeah. So there's quite a range from what Freddie's talked about in terms of the non-technical, what Malcolm's added in terms of non-technical, and then the focus on digital. And then you have a really big push around challenge, different diverse views around the table, challenging the current thinking and leadership. And I would add in there, I still feel there's a need for strong project management in these sorts of projects, and people who understand what it's like to be at the interface between academia and industry. I wanted to ask each of you for just a soundbite comment on, I hear with UK Spine a lot about academia and a lot about industry brackets pharma. I tend to hear less about biotech, SME, startups, mid-size. John, could you just comment on the level of engagement from that community?
I think it's pretty high, actually. I think everyone sees the opportunity in healthy aging. I think it is an area where population level studies can feed back directly into discovery. So there's certainly an appetite there, and money as well going into the sector to help small companies. I think I think there's less money available for some of the sort of boot work of drug discovery than there should be. The screening, the medicinal chemistry, the pharmacology, But and certainly in some areas, it's a golden age for investment.
Thank you. And do CROs play an important role in that process, or not?
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's partners knowing their strengths and where they can contribute. There's a lot of expertise in CROs and a lot of productivity. It's just using it in the right way, I think. Yeah. And again, it comes down to project management, selecting the right partner for the task.
Malcolm, do you see biotech, SME, startup engagement in intervention?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely massively important and part of that ecosystem. I mean, it would have been like 15 years ago, you'd have had people come from biotechs who tell you what you need, what you've got, and actually they wouldn't have even done their homework to benchmark against technologies that are already available. Now, all biotech are populated by ex-pharma people. They haven't started from nothing. CROs have grown massively over the last 10, 15 years. So yeah, they're a very big part of the whole ecosystem.
Thank you. And from your perspective, Freddie?
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of project. So obviously, some types of projects, and I've talked to people which had different type of drug delivery, which was much more suited to, startup company, because it's a kind of new model or new way of drug delivery, which pharmaceutical larger company weren't really much involved into. So I think it really depends on the type of project the different people contributing to the UK Spine were doing. And there's niches and there's things that are much more established, and that needs different size and different types of company and organization. So there's definitely involvement.
Thank you, Fred. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat for further questions. I think we've answered well the questions that have come in so far. So if I may, I'll start the wrap-up session of 3-4 minutes for each of you to give the audience your take-home message around porous intervention, where we are and what we do. But before we do that, there's a question from Chaz here. And the question is, Bev and the team are planning the next phase of the UK Spine. How do you see the project evolving? John, are you comfortable starting us off?
Yeah, certainly. So I think it's continuing on the great start. It's from the target ideas and some of the screening, testing those, pushing them forward. It takes time, it takes money to do that. I think adding or building on some of the expanded network of collaborators that have sort of grown snowball-like on this, again, would be great. I think there's some great opportunities to bring in additional skills and thoughts and techniques to boost the effectiveness of the network. So yeah.
So more of the same.
Well, I think more of the same at larger scale, and more ambitious. Perfect.
Thank you, John. Freddie.
Yeah, I think I agree with many of the points that John said. That there is many projects which establish a good network within the course. So the question is, how can you involve and broaden the network to actually really develop that pipeline? Maybe a second aspect would be that it takes a lot to develop that network and to develop that kind of organizational infrastructure. So the kind of longevity and maybe business model for financing pose the question. You kind of fund it by a big fund over 3 years. Will you be able to do that in the future? And how will you be able to continue to fund that pipeline so it remains operational, and so that people who work in the different organizations stay committed to that network and to the porous pipeline?
Thank you, Freddie. Malcolm.
So I would continue to project manage well, so the train doesn't come off the tracks. I would define early the killer clinical experiment in the project and stick to it. So what's the hypothesis, and when have you got enough data to convince someone to invest more money in it? So what's your USP against the current gold standard, if there is one? And then use your networks to line up a couple of potential large companies, so you got a little bit of competition for whatever you're trying to sell.
Thank you, Malcolm. I think I would add to that. You know, I've been really impressed with the presentations today, and I can see from a year back, how much progress has been made, and the positive contribution from MDC is outstanding. I really make a strong case for the project management issue that Malcolm and I have both raised. I think the need for integrated scientists with data, with social and behavior. But I would challenge Bev right now and say, if you have to write an impact report in 1 year's time, how will you go about validating what you are about to do in the next year? Exemplify, case studies, and that will throw away all of the issues and concerns from academia and industry if you can show the value that you're bringing and that your process is KPI'd, monitored, tracked, and audited. I hope that answers the question. So I think we're into closing remarks. Let's start with Freddie.
So,
Hope you've enjoyed the panel, Freddie.
I did very much. I hope my contribution was useful.
Of course.
So I think it took a lot to actually start to build that network and to actually get people to collaborate and work together. And one definite takeaway from me and the work I did on the UK spine is really to see that complementarity between funding the science and funding the knowledge exchange. So I don't think maybe one can go without the other. You need to fund science to actually get people to work on things and then do the knowledge exchange. So I think it's a question about how to level up this collaboration and actually build the network or grow the network bigger and still keep that consistency.
Thank you. Malcolm.
I'd continue to expand the network, which is obviously expanding every time I come back and hear another talk is another leg to it. I think I might, at this stage, start thinking about building a key stakeholder map, who I need to progress the project and when I need them to do something. And I think if you do that, you'll identify perhaps where the gaps are as you try to drive this thing through.
Fantastic. That gap analysis is definitely a recommendation for Beth. John?
Yeah, well, just more of the same, really. I think as well as the gap analysis, identify the key partners that are going to help you at the UK and global scale. Who do you pass the ball to once you've got an asset? How do you encourage take up in healthcare systems and so forth? And just keep the ambition level really, really high and clear.
Yeah, so I think what we're saying, thank you, panelists. I think what we're saying is great job, keep the work going, build the network, gap analysis, impact report in a year's time. With that, I think I'll draw a conclusion. I really genuinely, sincerely enjoyed that. Thank you so much to John, Freddie, and Malcolm. And I hope you as delegates enjoyed this, the conference, and we're all looking forward to the final closing remarks from Beth. Thank you.
Thanks, Martina.
Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. I have been writing my to-do list as the panel session has been going on. My impact report, my stakeholder map, my expansion network, and so the list goes on. So thank you for my additional advisory board this afternoon. So wrapping up the conference and how it's gone today. Today we're focused on the drug discovery pipeline, and I think what's come across loud and clear is it's about the people. It's about building the network. It's about including social sciences, project management, data science, building the skill set in the UK to deliver this. We've had some super highlights. We've talked about the MDC drug discovery roadmap, the Dream AI platform, the Target Age platform, oxygen nanobubbles delivered in solution as a drinkable aid to conditions related to aging, preclinical models for senolytics, and sharing of samples by some of our researchers. So I think that really sets the stage for tomorrow and our final session, where we're looking at, we're well aware of the cost of drug discovery, and taking something from novel concept to market can take many years, over 10 in many instances. So tomorrow we're going to focus on the repurposing and repositioning story in some detail that we've heard mentioned a number of times today, and how we can use existing drugs to prove the hypothesis that UK Spine are working on. We're also going to think about novel ways of financing this, thinking outside of the box, where areas where they don't traditionally fit in the business model of the pharmaceutical companies, how can we find different ways to finance those? And hand in hand with that is demonstrating the economic benefits to the NHS and to wider society. So we're joined by an equally diverse set of speakers. So I'd like to finish and say that tomorrow we'll continue to answer the question of who benefits, who pays. But for now, the sun is shining where I am, and perhaps it is where you are. So please have a lovely evening, and we'll see you all tomorrow.